You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and technology to see how things are changing, the way we get music business done. I'm Dmitry Vitsa, your host. I'm the CEO and founder of Rock, Paper, Scissors, the publicity firm that focuses on music technology. And Tristra Yeager, our writer-strategist, is here as well.
Hey there.
And we have the excellent honor of having returning back to the podcast, Cherie Hu. Hey, Cherie.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back.
Yeah, this is fun. We haven't done this with you yet, but we do these news roundups every couple of episodes where we just go through a list of articles and just have a chance to chat about it. For folks that are listening, if they haven't had a chance to read some of the trade press or things going on in the industry over the last week or two, it's a fun way for them to go jogging or wash dishes or do whatever, do their commute and just hear us jab about it and start to think a little bit about some of the things that are coming out. If you don't know Cherie, you should know Cherie. She's got an excellent newsletter and podcast called Water and Music. You can find the podcast on any podcast streaming platform, but you can also find out about Cherie at cheriehu.com, CherieHu.com. And she also writes for Billboard, Forbes, Music Business Worldwide, and others. So Cherie, so fun to have you here.
Yeah, really glad to be here. I really like this roundup idea. So yeah, super excited.
Awesome. So in fact, why don't we kick off, and Tristra, thanks for pulling together several articles that we're looking at this week. And the first thing you pulled up was actually Cherie's newsletter, in particular, some of the research, Cherie, you've been doing or exploration around kind of YouTube and why the top YouTube videos aren't from hip hop artists.
Or why? So there's a new fascination, I think, with premiering of videos, or a sort of a renewed interest, because for a while I think premieres kind of lost interest for a lot of folks, but now these debuts on YouTube are pretty darn big. But you made this amazing you had this insight that most of them are not from YouTube's bread and butter, hip hop, which hip hop has a lot of presence on YouTube as well as many other places, but these debuts tend to not be hip hop. So you dug deep into that. And I was wondering how you got started thinking about that topic and like what made you notice that interesting little quirk of the debut ecosystem, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I definitely started paying closer attention to this aspect of YouTube premieres ever since Ariana Grande hosted the entire live premiere around Thank You Next. And that was with, I think, a relatively newer feature on YouTube, but there were over 800,000 viewers at the time, and I think over 500,000 messages sent in the chat forum during the premiere. So it had a very kind of live, even though it was had a really big scale, it felt like a very intimate experience. And so ever since that happened, I just been trying to find other artists who've been doing the same thing. And I'd also been keeping in touch with the team at Vivo, and last week they just kind of offhand, because they had the update. Oh, it was after Taylor Swift's premiere of Me, the music video for Me, and I guess they were just sending this press release saying that that video broke the record for most number of views within 24 hours for a Vivo video. And then they in that release they also mentioned the top 5. And it was just Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, and Adele. Adele's video for Hello from 2015 is still one of the top debuts of all time for Vivo. And when I saw that list, the first thing that came to mind is, oh, that's really interesting. There aren't any rappers on here, or there aren't any hip hop artists. Just because if you look at other charts or other, I guess, articles written about streaming, focus on Spotify and Apple Music and other audio first platforms, rappers are dominating for sure. The likes of Drake and Post Malone are very often at the top. And so I just messaged this person I was in contact with at Vivo, asking, hey, just curious, are there any, have there been any hip hop artists breaking into the top 5 or who are at least in the top 10? And she was vast majority, no, no rappers have really made the top 10. As I wrote in my piece, the biggest premiere from a rapper is Nicki Minaj for Anaconda. So that was from 2014, long before I feel a lot of the rap landscape has changed, and there was a lot more of a focus on quote unquote SoundCloud rappers, at least in the music media. but even like Drake, Eminem, a lot of like their peers in the rap world, they don't even show up on the Vivo charts until around like the 30 mark or below. And I was like, oh, that's really strange. And Vivo also is like a significant but small part of the YouTube ecosystem. So I like just like looked on Wikipedia or elsewhere to see if there are any resources showing like debuts on YouTube of all time. And then that was like even more mind blowing for me because the top 10, the top 10 debuts by number of views in 24 hours on YouTube are almost all like non-Western artists. So like K-pop for sure dominates. BTS recently beat Taylor Swift, or I think Taylor Swift just like landed shy of BTS's I guess #1 spot for YouTube debuts. Blackpink has some videos there as well. There's one kind of Bollywood video that does feature Pitbull, and like the fact that he was the only rapper to make that top 10 with, I think it is like a kind of significant feature, but it's definitely not like a rap song. It is very much like a Bollywood inspired indie pop song. So he definitely had an in like through that collaboration. And it's just all of these pieces coming together through my like personal research over the last week or so. I just thought I wanted to write something about it, especially because I like realized there weren't that many or there wasn't that much research at the time on like the genre splits among these debuts. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you came up with these hypotheses about why this was occurring. Yeah. The first one was pop artists tend to premiere their music videos on the same day as their singles to maximize first week hype, while rappers tend to air out tracks for a few weeks to gauge audience feedback first.
That's kind of interesting. It's sort of the older, more traditional release strategy that Taylor Swift has kind of got down, and versus the newer, the one that has evolved since, I guess, like 2013, 14 of this, or even before then, if you think about the mixtape culture. So I thought that hypothesis was particularly interesting and pointed to some really bigger cultural tendencies in different genre scenes.
Yeah, definitely. And I didn't mention this that much in this particular newsletter, but I realized kind of after the fact that maybe like some genres or some labels or some people in the industry don't see premieres as necessarily relevant in an era where like anything can be streamed at any time. So maybe they're like really thinking about the long game, which is why, because also like some of the most viewed videos of all time are by rappers. Like a lot of Drake has a couple of videos with like over 1 billion views, I'm sure. Post Malone is like definitely approaching like the high hundreds of thousands to like over 1 billion views. So they definitely rack up views over time, and like maybe that's how people are trying to derive value from these videos now. It's kind of similar to like I definitely heard in the audio streaming world, first week sales still matter like to an extent, but it's really not indicative anymore of like the long-term success of an artist. And I know a lot of like marketing departments at labels and sales departments are trying to rethink their strategy accordingly. Like, oh, like maybe, it doesn't matter if we have this many views in 24 hours because that's not a good predictor of our artist's success in a year or in 2 years. And we need to like think more long-term for sure.
And then if I could jump to your second hypothesis was flooding the market with content. Rappers rely heavily on short form video and editorial playlists for exposure. YouTube is optimized for neither. So again, another genre scene cultural difference maybe in terms of how rappers might be approaching getting their content out there.
Yeah, definitely. I think, so in my newsletter, I mentioned this one marketing plan that's actually been institutionalized within a major label called the Pump Plan. And it's like inspired by this question, which I personally have very mixed feelings about, of like, how do you manufacture or guarantee virality? Like, I think you're already, that's already a lost cause. Like from there, like virality is like really hard to predict, but but in that plan, like people are mentioning platforms like TikTok, or I'm sure like Vine would have been a big part of the plan. And they all focus on like these much smaller units of video that I think travel a lot more quickly. And even just thinking like on Twitter, on the types of things that go viral, you're talking like videos that most of which like last no longer than 10, 20, maybe like max 30 seconds. And of course you can like integrate YouTube links into social feeds, and YouTube videos are very easily shareable. But I think just amongst smaller generations, especially, there just isn't as much mind share of YouTube compared to these other platforms in terms of like being able to spread short form content that quickly, and also have like a very clear like social element to it. Like YouTube for sure is social in that you have like just videos will have like comments, but that's like no longer unique to YouTube, and these other short form video apps I think rely a lot more on this concept of like a social graph and like you actually sending videos to your friends, whereas I think YouTube doesn't necessarily rely on that as much. And then also like as part of this theory, I think if you compare rap and like the traditional rap release cadence to like K-pop, for instance. So a lot of K-pop artists and a lot of mainstream pop artists, I would include Taylor Swift in this. Ariana Grande is a bit of an outlier, but usually they're not releasing like mixtapes of 10 to 15 tracks every couple months. Like they're very meticulous about their single release, and they'll like only release a single like occasionally, maybe like a handful throughout the year, leading up to an album. And there's like a several week marketing plan. Like Taylor Swift had a countdown clock on her website leading up to the premiere of Me. And that like helped generate a ton of hype around both the single and the video, hence the fact that the video broke the record. In contrast, my hypothesis that I presented in this piece is that like rappers are just flooding the market so much, and like yes, a lot of them do invest heavily in music videos, especially if they have the budget to do it at the very top. But like in the grand scheme of things, like that's just another piece of content in this flood that they've like created around themselves, which maybe benefits them over time as people are discovering more and more of their catalog across platforms. But in the first 24 hours, there's just like there's a limit to, I guess, the amount of energy and attention that that people will have around that specific piece of content if they know that you're already kind of creating your own deluge in the market. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting about also kind of like the sort of the non-traditional, people that maybe didn't come up in the label industry initially. The culture of hip hop and rap also had just a whole different approach to creating content outside of the rules of the game. And so you have there isn't as much of a funnel or bottleneck towards one particular format, which is I think sort of what you're saying in the sense of some of the shorter form video content is, it just mixes it up even more. And so it continues to sort of like inform, almost rebel against what other genre scenes are doing.
That's true. Yeah. And actually, one thought to build off of the last one, and I'll tie it back to this as well. So what I was going to say around like rappers releasing a ton of content, like several mixtapes a year, is that aside from, I guess, like viral short form videos, their strategy is actually like quite audio focused. When I was looking into this, it was like a lot more audio focused than I think I realized, and that I think playlists matter a lot more to rappers disproportionately. Like, of course, a lot of artists care about playlists, but like because you're releasing so much audio, I think a lot of rappers are trying to like maximize those audio streams. And I was thinking like that there's a reason why it's called like SoundCloud rap and not YouTube rap. I mean, I don't even know what YouTube rap like would look like, or like if that would even be like a a definable aesthetic. But just like SoundCloud and just the ease of use of like how audio travels and how like people are like reposting audio. That particular platform doesn't rely as much on playlists at the moment, but it's kind of like it indicates a similar focus on just making the song travel and be as ubiquitous as possible. Before maybe releasing a piece of visual content. And I also do point out in the piece that like Drake, two of his most popular songs, Too Good and One Dance, I believe, don't even have music videos. And like that was really surprising to me because I had like been hearing those songs all the time, like in malls, on the radio, just like wherever I was. I just have accepted that Drake is just everywhere and is like omnipresent, and like that is definitely his strategy without a video. Like he doesn't really need any I guess like visual support around that, and that's like very telling of just the strategy of audio being able to travel and exist in more places and like gather more people's attention or like mind share than like a video where you kind of have to, you know, pay attention 100% of the time. But then to go back to what you're saying, Dimitri, at the same time, yes, rappers are, I find that they do tend to be ahead of the curve for a lot of tech adoption. Like they're definitely very often the first to experiment with these new platforms. Rappers were definitely some of the first artists. This is like a very small feature example, but like to experiment with IGTV. Like Jaden Smith was the first artist to like release an album exclusively on IGTV. And then like rappers and their fans as well. This can become like a controversial topic as well in terms of like African American audiences and artists being like first adopters and really like defining the culture of a platform like Vine. Like in that case, like no doubt it was definitely these audiences that were kind of like using it first, and then like to what extent are they kind of taken along for the ride once Vine culture, for instance, really grows and becomes mainstreamed and monetized. But yeah, that trend is definitely there, and maybe that's why their mind isn't so set on YouTube, because it is a huge platform and it also has been around for a really long time. And the UX of YouTube hasn't really changed in the last like 5-10 years even. Like yes, it looks somewhat newer and like a little sleeker, but it's still like, you know, you have your video, you have your comment section, you have like the algorithmic recommendations on the side, you have your homepage. Like not much has changed. And so I totally understand rappers who are maybe looking for an environment that feels more fluid and changes more quickly.
On the other hand, your third hypothesis was about YouTube having one of the most international user bases in the world. So maybe to wrap this up a little bit on how that might be impacting hip hop's use of the debut video. And yeah, in other markets, YouTube may still feel new, or maybe it is such a global platform that there's a lot more genres competing for attention there too. So it doesn't feel as maybe hip hop friendly in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's more the fact it's a global platform than it's not hip hop friendly. Because I think a lot of people are just on YouTube and have like a YouTube account anyway and are visiting the platform daily. But so if you compare YouTube to a company like Spotify, for instance, I think Spotify is active in just under 80 markets at the moment. So it is becoming more international, but I do not think it's representative of all global music consumers. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that comes up a lot. Like as an artist, like once you upload your music to Spotify, you're reaching all listeners. I think that's just not true. YouTube has like, I think is like the market leader in terms of user adoption in markets like India and Africa, where Spotify isn't really active at all. Like Spotify just launched in India and they're doing pretty well, being like recent movers into the space. But YouTube is definitely, I would say like YouTube and then some other like local streaming platforms are like the number one streaming platforms for those audiences.
Yeah, YouTube has an advantage in this sense because the licensing issue is not the same as Spotify.
That's true. There's a big component of that, yeah.
And their sort of content menu is much broader. So if you are, say, a family in a more remote region of India where data is actually quite affordable, apparently, you may use YouTube to look at all sorts of different kinds of content, and some of that may be music and some may not. So, but whereas, something like Spotify, you're just like, what am I supposed to do with this? Where
that's true. Yeah.
YouTube, I think, can fit into a wider range of kind of different activities and cultural formats. So it's interesting.
So it's fun to be able to dive in with you on one of our news roundups, Cherie, and actually kind of like contextualize and pick apart some of what you've written about. We've got a bunch of other kind of news items we want to jump into. For our listeners, we'll probably jump in at a more rapid pace. Sometimes this is a little bit of a machine gun approach to news roundup.
No problem.
Hot takes. Super hot takes.
So Trisha, you pulled out this Wall Street Journal piece, Peloton sues music publishers alleging anti-competitive behavior, by Ann Steele, which ran April 30th.
Yeah, I think Anne covered the initial suit on the behalf of publishers for Peloton, and it's kind of a, I don't know if it's a sad case would be the word that's appropriate, but this dispute is kind of sad because I think Peloton did go into this thinking they had actually licensed things properly. That is what I've heard from other alternative licensing folks. However, they apparently did not, at least not from the point of view of the publishers involved in the suit. And now it seems like they're a little frustrated and are striking back. And there are a lot of these kind of disputes in the publishing world going on now. And I was wondering, Cherie, if you had any perspective. I mean, obviously, you may not be a lawyer and want to try to adjudicate these conflicts, but I'm wondering if you had any perspectives on why this kind of dispute is coming up more often. Is it because finally publishers see there's actually a pie they could get a piece of, or have publishers changed their tune for some other reason?
Yeah, really good questions. I think, yeah, I guess my mind is more towards that former point of like publishers seeing more of an opportunity in this space. And I'm actually, so one question that I have in mind, I think it's fine to mention on the podcast. But so I also take like spinning classes in Williamsburg at this place called Flywheel, and all the instructors like come with their own playlists. And I'm actually, so I personally don't know yet actually where that music comes from. Like, are they playing just from their personal like Spotify playlists? Like, if yes, that would be a really big issue, understandably, from the perspective of labels and publishers, because like these like Peloton, Flywheel, SoulCycle, they're like significant money makers. Like, people are paying a lot of money to be in these classes a lot of the times, and music plays just such an important role in that experience being good in the first place. And then if you compare Peloton to a company like SoulCycle that now has like a whole in-house music team, and I think SoulCycle has like much more than its competitors, even Peloton, like realizing the importance of music in the success of its brand, and is like actually investing in the music team to either like secure rights for using music in its classes, or even like organizing live shows and like inviting live artists, and like really developing a relationship with the music industry directly, with like, you know, in-house resources. So yeah, I think maybe rights holders are seeing activity like that and then looking to all of the other competitors, which like at least in New York, SoulCycle is definitely like probably the most expensive one, but the other studios like aren't necessarily that much cheaper, and they're like, oh wait, we haven't really like talked to you yet, like maybe we should, and see if we're, you know, getting the value that we deserve based on the role that our music plays in your work.
Well, you've got your spin classes, but you've got all sorts of exercise
For sure,
classes,
like the whole
and
fitness
yoga,
landscape.
and
Yeah,
even massage. You know, playing music.
exactly.
And I always assume that, you know, the teachers may come in with their Google Play accounts or Spotify accounts and just play whatever, and then the venue has to pay the PROs for that. But I think in the case of Peloton, they actually are streaming along with video,
Right.
and so it's really a different type of license needed.
Yeah, it gets really complicated, and I've noticed that a lot of the sort of lower, more mass market fitness apps don't include music, and I think that is probably a conscious decision. As much as it makes the workouts a lot less fun, I think it probably makes their business model a lot more fun. So it's such an interesting space because music is so vital to the health of fitness and like what makes it work for most people. So
Well, and it's cool to see that these kind of innovation companies in the fitness world are creating an actual revenue stream for the music industry in a way that didn't exist, you know,
really
as
true.
much 5-10 years ago.
When you were jogging with your Walkman, you know, nobody got paid besides, you know, whoever you dubbed the cassette from. You know,
Or like let alone like knowing that you even played that song in your Walkman. Yeah.
There
in
was
that
some
particular
revenue
park.
for public performance in blank cassette sales.
Oh,
if I
that's
remember
right.
correctly, but it's still
Those,
one off.
those were the days, I tell you.
Yeah, who knows? So, Trisha, you also pulled up this piece by Darren Hemmings from Medium called "Music Streaming Services Are Gaslighting Us." What was your takeaway there?
Well, that title, yeah, maybe I would have chosen a different title, but everyone is, of course, welcome to their own opinion.
Well, I will jump in and say Darren Hemmings is the managing director of a digital marketing agency called Motive Unknown. So he might have made his motive known. I don't know.
Well, who knows what's going on in the background, but I did think there were some interesting points here about the user experience. Often streaming services point to how awesome it is that we have basically this huge buffet of music. And this author was arguing that, on the contrary, it can make you miserable. And there's such a thing as overabundance and just being overwhelmed by choice. And that there's yet to be a really what feels like an organic cultural solution to how do I find music that I actually want to listen to, not music that sounds like, or music that other people that like the same music I do listen to. I mean, it's especially hard if you're a voracious and eccentric listener, like many people who are Spotify or Apple Music subscribers. So he was basically saying that he felt like he had been sold a bill of goods in terms of the joys of having everything at his fingertips. And he kind of wished he could go into he probably still could if he wanted to. There's some great independent record stores all over the world. But, the joy of going to a record store, and I remember this from my youth 3,000 years ago, that you could go in and be like, hey, I really loved this, Cocteau Twins 4AD thing you sold me, and they'd recommend something else. They'd say like, oh, you should really try, whatever, this other band. So that's sort of the gist of the article, and gaslighting is extreme.
Well, he describes the experience as in one section where he talks about, imagine you go into a record store back in the 90s and they start loading up tens of thousands of albums into your car, and then they add a trailer and they add more, and they're like, oh, you paid £10 and this is what you got. You said you liked indie rock. Well, here it is. But then, his conclusion is sort of about him spending money directly on channels where artists get a large chunk of the sale price. And that's what he's recommending that people do. Yeah.
And that was something I think that Mark Mulligan of Media just had an interesting blog post about that as well, that there are other models kind of being kicked around more seriously. I think they've been around forever. Well, not forever, for years, but that there's more interest with what YouTube has done recently, for instance, where you can kind of reward a creator whose channel you think is really awesome, that there should be more specificity in how people are compensated, or how artists are compensated for the music that you love. Anyway, Cherie, I don't know what your thoughts are on all of this, but it's
definitely something bubbling in the industry about how to support artists and how to find the music you want.
For sure. Yeah, I personally am also of the opinion that touting like the millions of tracks that you have just doesn't really mean anything to me. Like if all these services are like, oh, we have 50 plus million tracks, 40 plus million tracks, just that isn't a selling point. It's just like a fact. Like, okay, sure, you have all these millions of tracks on your platform. After a certain point, I really don't think there's any like added benefit in adding a million more. Like, of course, there's an added benefit of like housing, like if you're YouTube, housing the entire diversity of creativity that's happening around the world. Yes, like that's a really great value proposition. But yeah, I pay for Spotify, and I probably only listen to like max
just
like
200 tracks, right?
exactly at the very maximum 2 million a month. Yeah. But yeah, like I'm not really interacting with that catalog at all. So yeah, there's a gap there between like what's marketed and what the user experience actually is. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said for the related artists. That is the only way I found interesting stuff on Spotify. Every once in a while, the algorithm will suggest something truly bizarre that warms my heart. But I love to just listen to all sorts of random stuff. But at the same time, it gets to a point where you're like, I cannot tell this electronic artist from another. And it's very you can get very disoriented deep in those rabbit holes.
Totally.
Sherry, I kind of think sort of what you're getting at is that there was a moment in time where when legitimate streaming services were coming online, where they had to collect a certain amount of catalog to be worth
That's true. Yeah.
worth subscribing
Not
to.
being a pirate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now you can't really differentiate by quantity. Once you get the majority of the tracks that are regularly being listened to, we don't have as much of this windowing happening. Sure, you could look at high def audio, high resolution audio versus not. That's a differentiator for some if you've got very fancy speakers. But in terms of catalog size, it sort of feels like everyone's moving towards having as much possible. So it's not really a differentiator. And so now we get into the moment of differentiation is really around these recommendations, and some cool things have happened. Everything from the moment of Songza all the way through Spotify playlists to Beats One, DJ style discovery, Pandora algorithm, human coded recommendation. And that, I think that's the conversation that we're in the middle of. It's a transitional period where we're saying, okay, so what's next after playlists? And it hasn't been resolved yet, but that is probably going to determine some success. The question is whether one streaming service is going to be able to hold on to a moat of some sort of discovery process that's stronger than others. So far, you feel a little bit, I mean, I've listened and been able to discover some music on Pandora versus Spotify or Apple Music. But honestly, like when I'm using my Sonos, Google Play's search is so much better. And I don't even have a Google Play account. Some friend of a kid, one of my kids logged in once. And so, but I noticed the searches on Google, like it's just like a Google search engine. It's you can misspell the artist's name and it pops up way better than the Spotify integration with some. Crazy.
Oh yeah, Spotify. If looking for non-Western or things with accent marks or stuff like that is not fun in Spotify.
Wow, we just went in the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But speaking of Spotify and discovery, there was this piece in The Verge. Spotify tests placing podcast episodes alongside music recommendations, and this does get interesting. And at the last New York Music Tech meetup in April, Alex White from Pandora read a really cool essay talking about where he sees the future of discovery. And he was also big on the integration of different types of audio, not just music. But Tristra, what stood out for you on this Verge piece by Ashley Carmen from May 1st?
There's been a lot of talk of what this tension between radio, especially in the car environment, and streaming services and other audio platforms. And so this really, to me, is like, wow, Spotify is making its playlist into radio. Where you have a little bit of music and then some chatter, such as this lovely podcast. And then you have a little bit more music. So it kind of sounds like a sort of a bot created radio channel. And I can only imagine how strange this could get. It could be really fun, but it could also be really
personalized
strange.
though. Also personalized, right?
Yeah.
Like, whereas in old school commercial radio, you might have some news integrated with some music and you're like, this is the mainstream lowest common denominator music. Whereas now you might be able to have your news integrated with music you personally like. Or
you could have like that cooking podcast and then it segues into heavy metal and Stockhausen. It'll be really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Sherry, it's so funny because both of us started podcasts while we're talking about things like Spotify all the time. And now Spotify's talking about podcasts.
Oh gosh, it's just it's an endless cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Tristra, I want to know more about why you picked this article about Snap. Snap's big plan to turn Snapchat into a gaming platform that you pulled off, also from The Verge, this time by Andrew Webster.
I was just noticing that we're seeing a lot of news. There's much pivoting going on. So Facebook had the big developers conference talking about this they've been talking about this for quite some time since all the scandals last year, about, switching towards more of a privacy focus, more of a personal interaction focus, which they felt, sort of lost their way a little bit. And meanwhile, Snap is sort of also trying to find its focus. As there's been a lot of talk about Snap losing a momentum and not being the hot new thing anymore, thanks to things like TikTok. So Snap, I think, is trying to create these game environments and various other ways of engaging people and differentiate itself from just this. There's a general malaise in the on the social platforms, and they're not quite sure what they are and where they're going. And I think that has implications both for music marketing and for people who find music in these various places. And Cherie, you think a lot about gaming and a lot about social stuff. So when I saw these pieces, I thought, oh, this might be a fun thing to get your 2 cents on. And yeah, especially Facebook. That to me seems like it could be a real struggle for some. I mean, musicians have been complaining about it for a couple of years now, how hard it is to work with Facebook now. And it seems like it's going to become even more challenging, but I guess that's tough to say, though. They're also licensing content, as Billboard announced recently.
Right.
So yeah, it's a strange moment. What's your take on it?
On all these pivots, yeah, it's super interesting. So one thing that Snap has like continually managed to do that I'm surprised about is remain popular among like a very specific younger demographic. So like my assumption about them, and I think many people's assumptions about them, was that given that they had a ton of users in like the ages 13 to like young to early 20s bracket, that they would grow up, they would outgrow Snap. Their tastes are like super fickle at that time, and then just kind of like leave Snap. But like I've read a lot of articles, at least from like an advertiser's perspective, saying that like Snap is more effective for us for still reaching like 13 to 20-year-olds than Instagram or Facebook. There's like a much more engaged audience like on Snap. So I think like Snap is definitely leaning more into that. I also know, although so in tech, I'm not sure how widely this is known, but there's this like concept of defensibility and like how which means like how well can you defend yourself against the competition if they try to do what you're doing? Like what's the size and the quality, the depth, etc. of like the moat that you're building around yourself. And I historically thought that like one of Snap's really important pillars in terms of defensibility was augmented reality, and the fact that they have things like Bitmoji, and they've like also like worked with artists to like make Bitmoji of artists, and like you can put them in your videos or your photos and kind of interact with them. Instagram has really not replicated that in its stories like to the same quality or like same diversity of opportunity for these interactive kinds of video experiences. So I think it is really smart for Snap to like lean into that, and I think obviously, yeah, there's like a ton of opportunity to connect that and the avatars and then the Bitmoji space with gaming. Like now you could have a character that is involved in gaming. And yeah, Facebook, I have very mixed feelings about. I feel like Facebook is always pivoting, and they've yet to launch a new feature that actually like makes a meaningful dent in that respective space. So like as an example, there's a lot of buzz when they launched Lasso, which is like a short form video platform that some people understood to be a competitor to Musical.ly at the time, before it was folded into TikTok. And then now a competitor to TikTok. People were like, oh my God, Facebook has like 2 billion users. They're all going to migrate to Lasso and sort of beat out all the competition. And that just has not happened at all. Like I like rarely ever hear about that app among artists, among like other creators or personalities as well. So yeah, I feel like no matter what new features Facebook tries to launch, they will always be bogged down in it's, even though it happened like relatively longer ago, the sense of like mistrust in the platform, and like all the problems that they're facing like politically, and the problems that like YouTube they're facing on like content moderation as well. I think like that will always kind of be their biggest handicap, and hopefully the thing that they'll pay the most attention to.
And just in terms of UX, I mean, Facebook is already so big and clunky and has so many layers, and it's already impossible to find anything. You kind of feel like any new rollout is going to be it's just going to be hard to even get users to be aware of it. Because it's so buried in what they're looking at every day.
So this Billboard piece on Facebook licensing by Colin Stutz, Facebook embraces music, how the social network is fronting the industry by licensing content, to me is also, I mean, it's been taking a while to see the licensing of music roll out instead of them solely relying on the kind of the takedown approach to music by user-generated content, partly because I think they are responding to things like TikTok wanting to have the ability to keep people on platform within Facebook and having those user-generated hybrid music licensing experiences as well. And I'll just be curious to see or learn data about what kind of revenue is being generated for the music industry from those Facebook licenses.
Yeah. And TikTok is struggling right now, I think, with some big negotiations on that front. That's going to be a really, I mean, if we thought the Spotify publishers, Apple Music back and forth tennis match was fun, I think that this might be another one for the coming months, where we're going to see a lot of back and forth and a lot of acting out in the press of these various tensions.
And maybe to bring this full circle from pretty much all of our conversations today, there's this piece from Complex called "How TikTok is Launching Rappers to Viral Success," and just pulled it into the mix just because obviously we've talked about Lil Nas X on here, but this is kind of a interesting framing that it's larger than a single artist. And Cherie, since we started by talking about your piece on YouTube playing a small role or a unexpectedly small role, at least with video debuts for hip hop, it's interesting to see this TikTok piece about it actually having a little more of that viral feel that you were talking about in the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. And TikTok is definitely like a different and distinct platform in its own right, but I think a lot of people feel that it fills a void that Vine left and hasn't really been filled yet. And like Vine also very similarly like launched the careers of some rappers and even like artists outside of that genre, like Shawn Mendes, who's like still doing really well, was discovered on Vine. And also I think like much more than other short form video platforms, TikTok is asserting its role in the A&R space. So I don't think the platform itself is going to is going to play a role directly in like signing and developing talent, but at least in its like headquarter country of China, and I think this is in part because of like local norms around like the extent to which labels can collaborate as opposed to compete with tech companies. But I know TikTok has been working with a lot of labels on the ground, trying to like source talent for them and then kind of be like a pipeline directly for these labels, and like them asserting like we can play this role rather than that kind of happening like not happening on their own watch. And so I think that I'm not sure if that same level of like institutional support has happened in the US yet, but I think just that points to just like the higher level fact that it is a Chinese owned company, and the way that like the Chinese music industry is doing business is so different from the US, but I think will undoubtedly infiltrate the way that these rappers and other artists get discovered in the US and other Western markets, I think.
Well, something crazy, we're as you know, Cherie, because you're coming to the Music Tectonics conference in LA, October 28th and 29th, which I'll talk about in a minute. When kind of keep an eye out what's going on in LA, because it seems like there is this convergence of both technology and music, record label content, obviously film, video game, all happening in LA. Doing a lot of LinkedIn research and things. There are something like 43 jobs open at TikTok in LA right now.
Interesting.
And you see a lot of interesting positions, people there that are in LA at TikTok, Americans in positions that are related to music and TikTok. So I think you'll start to see. I'm starting to see in that space more conversation there about purposefully driven music efforts and campaigns via TikTok. So I don't think it's going to feel as much like, oh, look, there's this Chinese company with these artists that have kind of gravitated towards it. It's going to feel a little more like what we see with other platforms, where there's a real creator community and there's a there's a team in place to work with those creators as well. So this is cool. Anything either of you want to throw into the mix before we wrap up the news roundup component here?
No, this is fun. I think this is the most I've thought about TikTok in a long, long time.
Yeah, I guess one additional thought that comes to mind is, especially in like the augmented reality space, there hasn't been like there's been so much investment in the space. There've been a lot of like artists and festivals doing one-off campaigns, but I'm wondering what an AR app like will actually look like, an AR-driven app in music, and that's like just a deeper question of like what consumer behavior will look like in like 5 years, because I think that will require like I don't think an AR app can take off right now, given like I guess our own preferences and our own behaviors. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see like how, if at all, that changes like 5 years down the line.
You know what I want to see? I'm kind of that makes me think of is, audio AR might pick up
Right.
faster than what we traditionally think of as AR. There just seems to be a lot of momentum, both on the headphone space, the
glasses, etc.
The wearables on the ear, though.
The hearables.
The hearables. Thank you. That's what I'm trying to get at. The hearables and also
wearables.
The voice optimized speaker stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's I mean, what happens if you turn on a setting in your voice in your smart speakers where whenever you start referring to cooking, there's some music that automatically starts playing that gets you going.
Oh my God.
What if, and the other thing is that audio can be layered. We're already used to, I mean, audio was the first AR. I mean, when human beings tried to evoke, otherworldly situations in religious context or spiritual context, it was always using music. So we are used to layering music into our consciousness to transform our perception of what's around us and to, seriously modify our consciousness, to not get too woo here. But
even just headphones alone, right? Headphones are the original AR for audio.
Absolutely.
Making music in a temple is AR. And that's the way it was actually viewed, right? You're evoking. You can make a god or a spirit do things through music, and or through a ritual. You can transform reality and actually shift what's happening. That said, I think it's going to be way easier. It's like built into us in a way that having another visual layer is going to be really challenging, or even having a voice giving us specific textual instructions, so that kind of semantic stuff. I think that processing is much more challenging. Obviously people could adapt to that, but I think the audio world is way easier to augment for most people.
Yeah, it'll be cool to see what happens there as well. The reason I think Pokemon Go worked so well was because first the innovation and technology companies fused these devices to our hands, and then we could lift them up a little higher. Versus having to adopt something new. And voice and audio. We've already gotten used to people wearing headphones and having speakers around and things like that. So, good question, Cherie. I like where you're going with that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's great having you on. Great that you were one of the first to sign up to join us and speak at Music Tectonics in Los Angeles, October 20th and 29th. If anyone wants to follow Cherie, again, you can go to cheriehu.com. You can look up Water and Music on any podcasting platform. You'll find out about her email newsletter, which is awesome. We've kicked off the podcast talking about one of the pieces she put in her newsletter. Done a great job at killing it on the Patreon side and showing other creators how you can really build a career while still doing the freelancing at the billboards and the music business worldwide, but also creating your own content. So congrats on all that.
Thank you.
Come over to musictectonics.com, sign up for our newsletter. You get a discount to the conference, musictectonics.com, October 28th and 29th in Los Angeles. Did I say that enough times yet? Trisha, thanks as always, curating great pieces. Cherie, thanks for joining us. We'll have you on again.
Cherie.
Yeah, sounds good. Anytime.
So much fun. See you around soon. Thanks again.
Yep.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.